This is the Working in Hell podcast with your host, Vinny Blasio. Each episode, Vinny takes you inside the world of New York State corrections, focusing on both corrections officer and law enforcement issues. And now your host, Vinny Blasio.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Vinny Blasio with your Working in Hell podcast. And today we have a special guest. Let me bring on. All right. And today we have a special guest with Mr. Dave Tessmer. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing well, Vinny. How are you? Hello, everybody out there.
All right. Well, it's glad to have you. So it's always better to have someone that's been involved. If you want to give the listeners and the viewers a little background about yourself, so those that don't know who you are know about your expertise.
All right. My name is Dave Tessmer. I worked 30 years with the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. I retired in 2019 as a sergeant. During my career, I spent a lot of time doing union stuff. Out of my 30 years, I probably spent 22 years involved in the union, from steward to chief steward, on all sorts of committees with the Executive Assembly. In my last 7 years in corrections, I was the business agent for the Western region of Niskova. And for a vast majority of that time, I represented the maximum security prisons in the Western region.
All right. And thank you for your service, Dave.
You're welcome.
So as we have been talking the last couple of weeks, we'll get into a couple of news stories that have been predominantly in the news cycles. We'll follow up on a particular one about Assemblyman DeLon and his display, basically about talking about his support for the HALT Act. And we know that we'll get into some assault numbers in a minute. But as we do every week, let's read the news. All right, the first one, let me put up here. This is a press release that just came out today. So we'll start with the newest topics. And this one comes from Wendy Correctional Facility. 8 officers injured at Wendy Correctional Facility in separate attacks. Both assaults committed by the same inmate. 4 officers need treatment at local hospitals for immediate release. Dated today, December 3rd, 2024, out of Alden, New York. An inmate serving a 10-year sentence for attempted robbery attacked and injured staff in separate attacks that occurred 10 days apart, sending 4 officers to local hospitals for further treatment. On Tuesday, November 12th, a female officer was releasing inmates from their cells morning breakfast. The inmate suddenly charged the female officer, grabbed her upper body, and attempted to push her off the second floor cell block. The officer defended herself as 3 officers responded to the attack. One of the responding officers grabbed the inmate, ate a body hold, and forced him to the ground. On the ground and extremely combative, the inmate was able to kick one of the officers several times in the head as he attempted to restrain his legs. The 4 officers were able to finally restrain his legs and forced his arms behind his back and applied handcuffs. Once in handcuffs, all 4 ceased. The inmate brought to a standing position and turned his head and spit blood on 3 of the officers, striking them in the face, eyes, and upper body. The officers escorted the inmate to the infirmary for evaluation, and he continued to be combative and disruptive. A spit net was applied as the inmate continued to spit at staff. Once evaluated by medical personnel, the inmate was placed in special housing unit. The female officer initially attacked sustained hand and leg injuries. She was treated by medical staff at the facility. The 3 officers who responded to the assault sustained leg, hand, and head injuries, as well as blood exposure. One of the officers were transported to St. Joseph Hospital, and others were taken to Erie County Medical Center for further treatment and did not return to duty. The second attack by the same inmate occurred on Friday, November 22nd. Initially, an officer attempted to apply handcuffs to the inmate, and he refused. After ignoring several more orders from the officer, the inmate suddenly punched the officer in the left side of the face, knocking him backwards. A second officer responded and grabbed the inmate in a body hold when he charged him, causing the officer and inmate to fall on the floor. On the floor and extremely combative, the inmate attempted to spit on the officer and break free. 2 additional officers responded as the inmate continued to struggle and spit at officers. The three officers were able to force the inmate's arms behind his back and apply handcuffs and a spit net. He was brought to the feet and all force ceased. The inmate was escorted to the infirmary for evaluation where he remained compliant. The officer who was initially attacked had his eyes swollen shut and swelling to his face. After being treated by a medical staff at the facility, he went to an outside urgent care for further treatment. The officer sustained a fractured orbital bone and fractured sinus and still hasn't returned to work. The three officers who responded to the assault sustained shoulder and hand injuries. They all remained on duty after being treated at the facility. The inmate, who was 30, is serving a 10-year sentence after being convicted in Queens County in 2022 for attempted robbery in the first and attempted robbery in the second. He was transferred to Upstate Correctional Facility after the second attack. Another day, another round of officers injured at the hands of inmates. 8 officers added to the record-breaking tally of assaults on staff at the hands of one inmate in 2 separate assaults. The injuries to staff were compounded in this attack at Wendy when the inmate deliberately spit blood on 3 of the officers in the first assault, causing significant exposure to them and a potentially serious health risk. If there was any type of disciplinary system left, there is a chance that the second attack might not have occurred. I can only wonder if the state legislators who pandered to the inmates and pushed through the HALT Act would think differently if they were attacked every day and had blood spit in their face. Maybe they need to experience firsthand what our members face every day they work inside a state prison before calling these assaults not serious. The HALT Act has failed miserably. Do you think this inmate thought twice about fracturing an officer's orbital? Instead of supporting inmates, maybe they should begin to support the men and women who protect them and the communities they represent if they had to walk in their shoes for just one day, stated Kenny Gold, the NYSCOBA Western Region Vice President. We go on. Here's another one. This one's out of the Central Region. This is done by WIBX950.com. In this article, this is dated today, came out this morning, and that is December 3rd, 2024. The New York State Correction Officers and Police Benevolent Association, NYSCOBA, continue to sound the alarm when it comes to violence in prisons. This latest surge in violence resulted in 2 injured officers and the discovery of illegal drugs. During a 12-day span from November 5th to November 17th, 5 inmate-on-inmate fights occurred at the Mohawk Correctional Facility in Rome, resulting injuries to multiple inmates. The violence extended to correctional officers as well. One incident was reported to officers when an inmate approached an officer station to report that they had been cut by another inmate. One incident of violence towards an officer occurred in the mess hall when the inmate picked up his food tray and threw it towards another inmate. The tray missed the inmate and struck a correction officer in the upper body. The second incident of violence occurred when an officer who was frisking an inmate for contraband. During the search, the inmate punched the officer with a closed fist. The inmate was detained and secured, and the search continued. As a result of the search, a balloon was discovered with paper inside of it with an unknown drug saturated onto the paper. The inmate had the balloon hidden inside his underwear. Weapons are also a problem in New York State prisons. NYSCOBA Central Region Vice President Brian Haluska says searchers recovered 2 weapons during cube searches. A sharpened toothbrush was recovered inside an inmate's locker, and a second weapon was recovered as a result of an inmate-on-inmate fight. After the fight was broken up, officers searched the cube of one of the inmates and located a weighted cloth underneath the inmate's bed, Haluska says. As we enter the last month of 2024, the onslaught of violence, drugs, and weapons at our state prisons continue. In one day at Mohawk, we had 3 inmate-on-inmate fights within hours of each other, one resulting in 1 staff being injured. Thankfully, the sergeant and officer who were assaulted and injured by 2 inmates only sustained minor injuries and remained on duty. This is not always the case. More serious attacks on staff are occurring, resulting in officers sustaining serious injuries, resulting in them being out of work for an extensive period of time. When that occurs, it puts a strain on staff that already is dealing with shortages and mandatory overtime. The current system remains unsustainable and will continue to be until the state addresses the violence with real solutions. The blame, according to Haluska, falls on New York State legislators who choose to handcuff the officers from punishing and properly disciplining those violent offenders. God bless those who risk their safety every day in a violent and dangerous job. The next one, this comes out of the Finger Lakes Daily News by Lucas Day. This is December 2nd, 2024. A sergeant and 5 officers at 5 Points Correctional Facility were treated at a local hospital after suffering from smoke inhalation after an inmate at the Romulus prison intentionally set fire to his cell. On Tuesday, November 12th, an officer assigned to the RRU observed the inmate begin to light a fire inside the cell. The officer called for assistance and ordered the inmate to extinguish the fire, which he refused. As the fire continued to grow, the officer used a fire extinguisher on the fire but was unable to completely put it out. The inmate began to set a second fire, which the officer extinguished with the fire hose on the unit. Unable to visually see the inmate inside the cell because of the level of smoke, 5 officers and a sergeant entered the cell and the inmate would not respond. Armed with a protective shield, the first officer entered the cell and located the inmate in the recreation pen of the cell. The inmate charged the officers and was pushed back into the pen with the protective shield. The inmate remained combative and struck one officer in the arm before he was put in a body hold and forced to the ground. The inmate continued to resist on the floor and remained combative, fighting with the officers, who were able to restrain the inmate's legs and apply restraints and handcuffs to his wrist. Once in restraints, all force ceased. When the inmate was rolled over, he spit blood and saliva on the sergeants and officers, striking them in the torso. Staff remained body holds until the inmate became compliant. He was brought to his feet and brought to the infirmary for evaluation. The sergeant and 5 officers were evaluated by medical staff at the facility, and it was determined that they sustained smoke inhalation and significant blood exposure. All were transported to Cayuga Medical Center for treatment. In addition, 2 of the officers also sustained knee and arm injuries. The inmate, 29, is serving 24 years to life sentence after being convicted in Richmond County of murder in the second, 2024, in connection with the stabbing death of his roommate in 2022. Last month, at 5 Points, 11 officers needed to be treated at local hospitals for smoke inhalation because an inmate intentionally setting fire to his cell. Now, a month later, a supervisor and 5 officers suffered the same fate. Smoke inhalation can be deadly and cause permanent lung damage, and although we've been reading the lawmakers believe our incidents are not serious, we don't see them subjected to smoke inhalation or blood spat in their faces. How would they feel if that happened to them? What would they tell their children when they arrive home? Every time an inmate attacks and injures staff that results with them being out of duty for an extended period, it creates additional staffing shortages and forces further mandatory overtime to fill those roles. While the legislators are sitting down with their families enjoying Thanksgiving, many of our members aren't afforded that luxury. Most are forced to work away from their families, caring for the convicts because the legislators refuse to address the current record-breaking violence and staff shortages. Maybe they should start addressing how many lives our members save instead of using convicts to further their political agendas. Our lives depend on it. Then again, our members know how underappreciated they are, and it's abundantly clear to us that nobody in the majority of government cares if they lived or died protecting their communities, stated Kenny Gold, Nice-Copa Western Region Vice President. Caveated from the paper, the fact that a defendant has been charged with a crime is merely an accusation, and the defendant is presumed innocent until and unless proven guilty. And the last one we have here, before we get into a couple of the assaults, officer cut at Greenhaven Correctional Facility and made alleged slashed officer's forearm. It's for November 27, 2024, put out by the New York State Correctional Officers Union. Stormville, New York, a convicted murderer allegedly slashed an officer several times on his right arm, causing him several lacerations to his forearm, wrist, and thumb at the Maximum Security Correctional Facility earlier this month. On Thursday, November 14th, the officer was escorted the inmate, who was in restraints, from the gym area. The inmate suddenly turned toward the officer and began swinging with a closed fist towards the officer's face. The officer immediately grabbed the inmate in a body hold and forced him to the ground. A second officer responded and assisted in gaining control of the inmate, who remained combative. Both officers were able to contain the inmate and brought him to his feet. Once under control, the inmate was removed from the gym area. During the investigation into the attack, staff viewed surveillance footage of the attack, which showed the inmate reached into his mouth and pulled out an unknown object. The inmate turned towards the officer and began making slashing motions at the officer's face, missing his face. After the attack, the inmate was escorted to the infirmary for evaluation and later placed in a special housing unit. The officer who was initially attacked sustained multiple lacerations to his right arm and thumb. He was transported to Mid-Hudson Hospital for treatment. Staff determined that the officer was cut with an unknown weapon by the inmate. He was treated and released and did not return to duty. The officer who responded to the incident sustained pain and swelling in his lower back and neck. He was treated by medical staff at the facility and remained on duty. The inmate, who is 29, is serving 20 years to life sentence after being convicted of murder in the second and criminal possession of a weapon in the second, in connection with the 2013 shooting death of a 19-year-old man in the Bronx. Staff did not locate the weapon used. Thankfully, the inmate was unable to cut the officer's face, but was still able to cut his arm with the weapon he had secreted in his mouth. The second officer responded quickly and helped stop the attack. Otherwise, it could have been much, much more serious. As Docs continues to downplay the severity of the violence inside prisons, it is clear with this attack and the slashing that occurred at Sing Sing earlier this month that the attacks are growing and becoming more violent despite Docs' claims. Until the violence is realistically addressed by the department and the state legislature, this type of violence will continue well into 2025, said Joe Horacek, Nice-Coba Mid-Hudson Region Vice President. And as you can see, these violence is just growing, not only in the numbers, which we'll get to in a second, but just the incidences and how serious they are. We know that Docs, and we'll talk about that with Dave, it downplays the seriousness of the officers' health or the injuries that they occur, but the incidences themselves are becoming more and more prevalent and much more violent. We just had at Fishkill another contraband item that was thrown over the fence. We know this is commonplace at Fishkill. And they close some posts. I won't say which ones to protect the employees that work there. But with the staffing crisis and the post closures, contraband is becoming more and more prevalent, and they're throwing it now directly over the fence. This one, I believe, was from the admin building, though I might need to correct that. But in that contraband, 4 cell phones were found, chargers, a SIM card, and they're believed to be approximately 2 pounds of marijuana that was found. And this was a great job by staff because the tower officer was alert and he saw and observed the incident. So kudos to the alert tower officer that was able to see the contraband. And then we also did Greenhaven when we talked about the slashing. The inmate was also alleged to cut another staff member back in 2020, I believe, a couple of years before this incident. So you see that the inmates are repeating their behavior. I believe when he cut staff, it actually was a doctor. And then back to Fishkill, as you can see, their social security numbers that made the papers, the headlines, that was breached by a FOIL request from the inmates. They released the social security numbers of every single employee at Fishkill. Assemblyman Anil Beetham sent a letter to the governor and the commissioner of Docs to do more. It was a great letter. He asked that they give credit protection to the employees, and he sent that letter directly to the governor and the commissioner. The commissioner did send a memo to all superintendents dated November 26, 2024 on how to properly handle and dispense FOIL requests from inmates. But again, officers are the ones paying the price as their personal information is distributed to the facility. Once the damage is done, you can't put that back into the bag. Also on the facility, as we know, with the sergeant's exam score, every single employee at the one that took the test, the officers that took the test at Elmira Correctional Facility, they all failed. That's a statistical anomaly. So that just by statistics alone couldn't happen. So obviously there's a big problem with the test. We all know that many, if not all, of the officers at Fishkill on Section 3 scored a 0 in that portion of the test. So obviously there's a problem with civil service or how they're scoring or how they did that exam. So I believe that the sergeant's exam was pulled from civil service, is not accessible at this time until they do complete an investigation as far as what they can do or not due onto the test scores. And I'll just put it back up on the screen. Some of the articles that I just read, as I steamed through that, I forgot to get those up there. And the assault numbers. So let's get on to the assault numbers real quick. And Dave and I will talk more in length about this. So just this week alone, there's been 60 more inmate on inmate assaults. So we have a grand total of 2,648 incidences, up from 2121 from incidents from 2023. So just week alone, we have 60 more, and Doc should be releasing the new November or all of November statistics coming up December 1st. Usually they come out with all the assault numbers for November. So we see that we've already broken a record. Now we're into the inmate on staff assaults. There was 30, if I can read my own writing, 37 more, I believe. We're at 1902, a new state record, not a record that needs to be broken, but every week these numbers are going up. And last year of 2023, there was 1,677, which broke a record from the previous year. So as you can see, these numbers are just going in the opposite direction of where they should. We're breaking records of all the wrong kind. And what are your thoughts on the new assault numbers, Dave?
It's absolutely mind-boggling to me how anybody in a position of authority, like a commissioner or a legislator, an assemblyman, when they pass these bills and we look at the numbers year after year, the rise in assaults, the injuries to inmates, the injuries to staff, how they justify keeping things the way they are. We have less inmates than we've had previously. We have less facilities than we've had previously. We have less officers than we've had previously, yet all these numbers continue to go in the wrong direction. We set records every year. The commissioner coming out, blaming staff, blaming the union. Perhaps he should take a look in the mirror. Some of his policies and some of the things that he's implemented certainly hasn't stemmed the tide of dangerous contraband or incidents in the facilities. I mean, we can go back to the clear bags. It was staff that was the issue. Staff was always the problem. And for him to say that it's an issue is a disservice to all the men and women that work in the prisons. And I just can't understand how any of these assemblymen or politicians that put these laws into effect can look at these numbers and justify what they're doing as a success. It's absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And some of the people that I've spoken to or emailed or messaged, they kind of take the blame off of the commissioner and put it on to the legislator, which some of that is true. Obviously, the commissioner doesn't make the laws, but his policies, I think you just hit on it a second ago, he's not helping the matter, and he's definitely not sticking up. On the last podcast, I don't know if you heard it, but the Assemblyman DeLon, he basically said, well, the commissioner has not asked for a repeal of HALT. And we all know, and I know that you know the commissioner, you've worked with him and in his different ranks throughout the docks, his different positions. So I know that you've dealt with him. What are your thoughts on him not getting any of the blame?
He deserves a lion's share of the blame. Commissioners we've had in the past, whether we liked them or not, we've had issues with past commissioners, Gord and Coughlin, but at least they stood up for their staff. They forced, and even Annucci, they forced New York State to take docks to court and enact some of these things. From what I see, Dan Marticello will not make that stance. He's more concerned about his appointed position than he is taking care of staff. The simple fact that he hasn't asked for a repeal of HALT, even if they don't do it, he at least asked for it. Actions speak louder than words. He can say anything he wants about his staff and that he cares for his staff, but his lack of actions definitely speak louder than any actions he's taken. There's things that he can do as the commissioner. He can resist what they're doing, but it's apparent that he's more concerned about his appointed position and staying where he is than doing the right thing by the people that work for him.
I know there's a lot of people that are unhappy. And just to get back, I'll add this as I do every podcast. You can see just the number of Marticellos that are in. I've sent this complaint to the Commission on Ethics and sent that into with a formal complaint, because as we know that we were always done the ethics training and mandatory training that New York State has, is you could not supervise someone else that was a subordinate if they were related to you. So how all these people with the same last name are in positions of leadership within the Department of Corrections, I just don't know how that isn't a violation of Public Officers Law 73 and how they're able to get it. But docs is, as we know, antiquated in their ways. I don't give this commissioner a pass at all. I'm not saying that he's a total blame for everything. He's not the one that installed HALT, but he did instill a lot of the policies that we're seeing that handcuffs the staff, and we'll get to a poll on the inmate disciplinary system in itself. And I couldn't agree with more on what you said. But when you hear some of these incidences, Dave, what goes through your head when you hear of the officers getting cut now? I mean, we've had incidences in the past, and obviously there's always been fear of safety, but nothing like what you're seeing today. What are your thoughts on that?
It's absolutely mind-boggling, the frequency with which these incidents occur, and it's clear through the number of incidents, the type of incidents, that a lack of disciplinary system and lack of repercussions for the inmate are leading to the records that we're having. The commissioner and the state legislature and the governor, they have an obligation and a duty to provide a safe working environment for the officers. The officers don't sign up to go to work to be assaulted, to be cut, to be spat on. These things happen, but they've never happened with the frequency that they're happening now and the severity with which they're happening now. And I don't understand how this information can't be compiled and laid out, and just for the average layman or even these people that have passed these laws to look at it and say what they're doing is not working. The very least, this should be laid at the commissioner's desk. He should be able to look at it and say enough is enough and take the back of his staff. But we know that's not going to happen. Talking about something you talked about earlier there, Vinny, you talked about the nepotism with the Marticellos. Let's not forget about the family members and the friends of these family members that are in positions as well. You've got people in labor relations, assistant commissioners, that are family friends that don't bear the same last name, but it's nepotism at its finest as well.
Yeah, but I couldn't agree with you more again. But let me just ask you a question, and going back to some of your instances with the union and going back to your business agent experience, one of the last poll questions that came up last podcast was, why cannot someone, meaning the attorneys for the union, compile the data, just like you said, and show that New York State isn't making a workplace safe and the violence is putting them in harm's way? And why can't they sue to have better working conditions? Now, that we're not talking about working conditions in the sense of having a contract, that's a whole subject for another time. And I think everybody knows my stance on that. But we're talking about just the violence component and having the attorneys file some type of a suit against the state saying that, hey, just like you said so eloquently a minute ago, the state has a duty to protect you, and saying, hey, you go home the same way that you came in. What are your thoughts on that?
I call it the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again with the same people, expecting a different result. If you remember back when you were involved, Vinny, and when I was a business agent, There was a point in time when the attorney said that they were going to file a lawsuit, and I myself spent probably well over a month collecting data, sending it to the attorneys to show the incidents that were occurring. And back then, the number of incidents paled to the incidents we have now. There was absolutely nothing done with that. We were told that they could file a lawsuit um, for safe working conditions, and then we were told that they couldn't. I just, I find it, I don't know how to say it. It's just, it's unbelievable that we're in the position we're in. It's getting markedly worse, and yet we're doing the same thing over and over, which is nothing. Something's got to give. The old saying goes, you can indict a ham sandwich, you can file a lawsuit on anything. Um, then the attorneys will tell you that it's a frivolous lawsuit, and they could lose their license to practice law. These injuries aren't frivolous. These incidents aren't frivolous. These are Doc's own numbers. It's their own incidents. They have this information. How can they say it's not occurring or not occurring at a higher rate? It's just, I don't know what to say about it. It's mind numbing to sit here and see the lack of urgency coming from the attorneys.
Yeah, and that was I was shocked at the number of responses and emails, text messages, messenger things that I got all on that same subject. And it just seemed like they wanted someone to pick up the sword. And I don't even think we've said this 1,000 times throughout the years that most correction officers don't care at the end of the day. I mean, obviously they want to see everything won, and if they can't, then just give them a reason why. But they just want to know that somebody is fighting. And I think at the end of the day, whether the lawsuit failed or something else, people just want to know that, hey, you got to do something. We got to make an awareness campaign. And the people that are sitting outside of the fences, like you and I, are trying to bring as much awareness to it as possible. But the people that you're paying money to, as far as the lawsuits and attorneys, and I believe that their retainer is also coming up at this coming executive assembly, if I'm not mistaken. But it's one of the big, you're paying a lot of money in union dues to go to your biggest portion. And for them, we sat it through the years, you and I both. I just don't know how they don't pick up that sword and say, all right, we're gonna do something. Lose. I don't believe that, like you just said, a frivolous lawsuit, really, they're going to be in danger of losing their lives while people are losing life and limb at a facility.
You file a lawsuit, you get in front of a judge. I don't know any reasonable judge anywhere that would look at the statistics, look at the number of incidents, not just against staff, but inmate on inmate as well, and at least enact some sort of temporary injunction and say, hey, wait a minute, we need to take a look at this. The statistics speak for themselves. It's something needs to be done to bring it to the forefront. Like you said, the biggest expense since the union's inception has been the attorneys, and it continues to be. They're a vendor, they're paid by the union. They take direction from the executive assembly and the executive board, and they need to do that. Instead of telling people what they can't do, they should be coming up with solutions on what to do.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. And that'll get right into our next segment. So we're going to put this up on the screen here. We'll get the 3 quick polls, because one is going to go directly into what you just touched on. But first, we'll touch on the first poll here that was put out on November 23rd. And that was, with all the recent exposures, meaning chemical exposures at the different facilities. And we're talking about mostly staff, though some inmates did go out with us as well. With all the recent exposures in many facilities, the issue of carrying Narcan was brought up by many people who reached out to me in emails and messages. And the question was, should security staff each be issued Narcan? And the reason this came up was obviously the significant exposures at Collins, Wyoming. Then there was one at Fishkill, and then obviously other facilities have followed suit. The question was predominantly on the issue of having Narcan to help your officer, but obviously if you're going to be carrying it, you're going to be also carrying it as a first responder for inmates as well. But it was, should security staff each be issued Narcan, and it was 33%, which came in at 154 votes for yes. And I was a little kind of shocked at this. And then there was an overwhelming 301 votes that said no, they did not want to carry it. So 67% of those polled said no. 33 and just over that came in at a yes at 154 for a total of 455 votes. I'm a little shocked that they didn't want to carry Narcan. I get it, but I was kind of shocked at that result.
I'm shocked, a little bit shocked as myself at that. I can see some staff, given the conditions that they work under, the liability issue, and the department coming after them saying they should have done this and should have done that, but they didn't do this and you did that instead. Middle ground, and it's something the department should look at, in my opinion, is have it in every work area. Have it accessible to staff in every area in case it is needed for staff or inmates. The bigger facilities, your maximum security facilities, they have vaults, they have key storage, have the Narcan there, have the Narcan in the blocks, Narcan in the housing units at the medium security facilities. Yeah, it should be available for staff and inmates alike.
Yeah, and I think that on the most part, they're trying to put it in some common areas. But as you know, when they do that, it's not always accessible for staff because staff are the last ones to be trusted.
Exactly.
Here's the next poll. This one is going back to those that didn't see last week's podcast on episode 14. This was came up because of the press release that Assemblyman DeLon put out that we were just talking about before. So this is the second of the third poll. This was put out on November 25th. The background, Assembly Correction Chairman Eric DeLon says the increase in prison violence started years before HALT took effect, and it's too soon to change it. They got, his words, quote, they got to make the case that it makes sense to do, end quote, DeLon said. You just can't say, well, assaults are up, and maybe not all of them are serious, so let's just repeal HALT. DeLon says Democrats in the Assembly don't have an appetite to repeal or tweak the law, and lawmakers plan to focus on reducing staff overtime mandates, facility updates, and improving educational programs for people in prison instead. DeLon added he plans to grill docs and union leaders at the issue at the upcoming budget hearings this winter. I'm more concerned about the programming that docs has that provides reform for people who want reform on the inside and how those services are being delivered, he said. Unbelievable. And we'll get to that in a minute because that statement alone, I'm sure that Dave will have a lot to say on that. But the question on this was, do you agree with the Assembly Correction Chairman Eric DeLon's statements above? And out of those, I can't believe there was two, but there were two votes that said, yes, I agree with Assemblyman DeLon. It's too early to comment on HALT policies. So I don't know if those were accidental votes or if those are true believers in the HALT program. I would venture to say that those two people didn't or have never been assaulted. But the overwhelmingly 261 votes, 100% said, no, I disagree with Assemblyman DeLon. He should work a shift in a facility and then comment. So
he should absolutely work a shift in a facility, and he should show up at the executive assembly and sit in front of the chief sector stewards and the leaders of the union and explain his position. Him and any other legislator, Salazar, all of them that have supported this kind of legislation, they need to come front and center, not in a controlled environment where they're asking the questions of the union leaders, but they need to come to the union leaders and explain their position to the people that work in these facilities, and see firsthand and hear firsthand what goes on every day in these prisons. It's just, Vinny, I can't believe where we're at. we went through this. We were involved in the union for a long time. We effectuated some small changes over the years, and to have things go the way they're going, and people just saying that there's not an issue, they don't have an appetite for it. Well, maybe they need to be force fed some things to change their appetite.
Yeah, I mean, the statements alone, just that, the assaults were going up before HALT. So, I mean, that statement alone just shows how uneducated they are in the disciplinary system of docs, because if you're already saying that the assaults were going up, which they were, and now all of a sudden you're going to implement and codify into law the HALT Act, and you're going to say that giving them a maximum sentence of 15 days is going to help the system. I just can't wrap my head around that. And then they say that it makes no sense to do, and that no one has an appetite to repeal HALT. How many people have to get hurt before there's an appetite?
Let's look at the percentages, Vinny. They're saying that there was an increase before HALT went into effect, but like we talked about earlier, there's less inmates, less staff, less prisons, yet higher numbers. Let's look at the percentage of assaults per officer back before HALT, and the percentage or likely percentage or likelihood of a percentage for assault on staff since HALT. There alone, that would end their argument. If you have 25,000 officers and you have 1,600 assaults on staff, and you're down to 13,000 officers and you're having 2,000 or almost 2,000 assaults on staff, the percentage is a lot higher. The likelihood of somebody being assaulted, and that's happened since HALT. That's an easy way for them to look at those numbers and understand that what they're doing isn't working. And you take it a step further. Look at the incidents with the inmates, and the same thing with contraband. Everything is going north, yet the number of inmates, the number of prisons, and number of staff are going down.
Yeah, that you just made a great statement. So I'd like to see, and maybe that should be used by whoever testifies for the union, or whoever testifies in general, or maybe some of the uh, people that are against HALT in the Assembly and Senate. The assault per staff, I like that. As you're talking about assault per officer and how the officers are going down and how that's increasing, maybe that's a better way to put it in perspective. I actually like that. But the part that really was concerned about that too is twofold. In DeLon's statement, he says, "I'm more concerned about programming." It's like they're already getting enough programs. They're programmed more than any time in history, and you want to add more. You're at a staffing problem that's created by the legislator and by the policies and by doc. And now
Absolutely.
we want to add more staff intensive to get that. And as you and I both know, there are some good programs and for the inmates, but the people or the inmates that are going to take advantage of these programs, usually, especially the college programs, they keep saying that, and it's like, and whether you're for or against the program is not the issue, but the people that are taking advantage of the college programs are traditionally not the type that are causing the problems in the facilities anyway.
Absolutely. The ones that are causing the problems are the ones that need the intensive programming and intensive training. But there again, you need more staff to run these programs. Nobody's saying that you don't need the programs, but you can only do so much. To use a phrase that people have probably heard before, and it's an old prison guard phrase, you can only put 5 pounds of shit in it, or you can't put 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. It just doesn't work. And the officers in these facilities are at a breaking point. There's only so many hours in a day, and only so much you can do. You could make the argument that the legislature wants an open door policy in these prisons and just let the inmates run wild. And then
Not
where
any
would we be?
facilities at all. I agree.
Yep.
All right, let's get on to the last one, because that's going to pick up right where we got off of this subject here. So this is the third poll, and this goes into the background as far as the inmate disciplinary. So the background, much discussion has been given concerning the relaxed inmate disciplinary system. If you do not want to answer in the poll, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people did send me private messages on this particular question, because as you can see by the vote, I was shocked again that there was one vote, but we'll get into that in a minute, that the people do not feel that the disciplinary for inmates is fair and consistent. So the original two choices were yes, the disciplinary system is fair for all. That received one vote. I'm kind of shocked at that. The second choice was no, the disciplinary system favors the inmates to the detriment of staff. And I forgot to uncheck the box for the poll. So someone was able to add a third, which was kind of funny, and put what disciplinary. And obviously that you can see from the screen, 76% agreed that there is that the disciplinary system favors the inmates to the detriment of staff. That got 399 votes. So out of the 532 votes, one agreed that the disciplinary is fine. And then what disciplinary, you almost have a quarter of those surveyed that said what disciplinary. So I mean, the staff obviously has no confidence in this disciplinary system whatsoever. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? 76% say no, and then when you add it together, what disciplinary? Basically, that's almost every person surveyed said that they have zero faith or they don't believe in the disciplinary system.
It's the world of participation trophies and timeout, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work with violent offenders. I'm sorry, and that's exactly what they're doing by handcuffing the department and the people in the department, trying to make a safe environment for staff and the inmates as well. I mean, look at the changes you went through when you were involved with doing disciplinary hearings, Vinny, and the limits they put on you. There again, you can look at the changes they did with the disciplinary system, the incidents we have, where we're at with it, and you can plainly see that it doesn't work. It hasn't worked for a long time. There is no deterrent, and the inmates know there's no deterrent. There's certain people that are going to do bad things. And one of my favorite things that I used to say, and it's obviously true with this now, lack of opportunity doesn't constitute good behavior. And now we're seeing the converse of that. There's more opportunity, and the numbers of incidents and the seriousness of the incidents is rising.
Yeah, it really is. And the couple that with everyone knows it, you can smell it and breathe it in the facilities, is that the drug issue inside the facilities, there's no deterrent, like you said, to begin with, and now there's no deterrent for drugs whatsoever.
I thought that was going to be taken care of with the clear plastic bags. It was dirty staff that was bringing all the stuff in. And let's face it, Vinny, some of these politicians down in the city, this is, they think that inmates should be able to make money to provide for their family, and that's a way to make money. They don't want the drug problem to stop. If they did, they could do it. They obviously don't want it to stop. And again, it makes it hard on everybody. It makes it hard on staff, makes it hard on other inmates. It's absolutely. I'm flabbergasted at the condition of the department now. How anybody would want to work or want to stay there is beyond me.
Yeah, we're going to get to that because that's going to bring us to the next point. But on the disciplinary system itself, if there is no deterrent, what is the reason for behaving? And as you can see, and you know, because not only did you work it, you saw both sides. I mean, it's you saw the rise in gang activity. So there's no deterrent for them. So they can continue to charge for phones, and you see that causes a problem into itself. And we're not just seeing the rise in violence as far as the officers. I mean, now they also have to look at the people that they're supposed to be care, custody, and control there when they're not even protecting the inmates. I mean, right. A lot of people want to leave that portion out, but now that it's getting such a big number as far as breaking new records on inmate assaults, I mean, a lot of that is driven. Who wants to pay for a bar of soap when you shouldn't have to?
Exactly. I mean, back in the day, Vinny, when you and I were working, they used to monitor phone calls. There was gang gang interdiction units. There were people that were identified gang members. They were split up. They were separated. There was an effort made to keep the gangs under control. Now it's just a free for all. There's no effort on anybody's part, and even if an inmate decides to do something or get involved with some sort of illegal activity, there's no deterrent. If he gets caught, he knows he's going to get 15 days. And if he's a good boy for 3 or 4 days, he's going to be out in a week. There is no deterrent. It's a small price to pay to make the money they're making and have the control that they have.
Yeah, there really isn't. And that goes directly into the whole systemic problem as we get into who wants to take the job now.
Nobody wants to take the job. Why would you want to? Want to take the job, go to a facility, work your way back home, and then 2 or 3 years down the road, find out you don't have a place to work and you're back on the road again. Not only that, the amount of time you spend away from your family, the toll that it takes on you mentally, physically, working all these hours. The department's setting up a perfect storm. Look what happened back in Southport in 1991 or back in the early 90s with all those with the riot that they had there. It was overworked staff, lax security. The department's setting themselves up for failure, and the only thing they're going to do is point blame at the union or the officers like they always do. Why would you want to go to work with the risk of getting assaulted, getting stabbed, or catching a communicable disease? Why would you want a job where I go to work at 7 o'clock, supposed to come home at 3 o'clock to go see your son or your daughter's musical or parent-teacher conference, and you're not coming home. You're not coming home for another 8 hours or longer.
Or longer.
Right. It's not the union's fault that this is occurring. It's strictly and squarely on the department, their policies, the politicians, and the governor. They all have a part in the condition of the system now. They're the ones that created this condition, and they have to fix it.
Yeah, and I don't see it getting fixed anytime soon. And the officers, I mean, just by listening to most, they have given up. There's no, they're so beat down, and I'd like to call it like those that are in a domestic abuse relationship with docs, because they're so beaten down that they're just used to it. The fight out of them is gone. A lot of them, right or wrong, I'm not going to comment on that, but I understand the mentality, or like, why do I even bother? Why do I search? Why do I write misbehavior reports when nothing happens? And they've given up. And that's when the officers have given up, that's a bad sign.
It is. One thing, it's going to fall on deaf ears, but when you do that search and you find that contraband, and you find that shank or those drugs, it all those statistics can be used to show the conditions that they're working under, the conditions that are being created. But I also understand that after being in the position that they've been in for as long as they have, especially the last several years, I don't fault them for that. But at some point, you've got to have a little self pride and try to make things better for yourself or for your fellow staff members. It used to be that had an effect on how the facilities ran, not so much anymore. And I understand it. It's a shame, and I wish I knew what the fix was for it. I think we both wish we knew what the fix was for it.
Yeah, it's really bad. But what would you say to the only thing that I'm seeing less and less of now, especially within the last year, is the everyone is looking for someone to do something, but no one is doing anything for themselves. At least, I mean, that's just putting out a blanket statement. Obviously doesn't encompass everyone, but a lot of that is true. You just don't see you and I have seen wild things, whether it be at union meetings, at local union meetings, at lineups, at flagpole lineups, or rallies, or things even beyond that, job actions. I mean, you've seen it all. We've been there on both sides of it, representing them and participating in.
And nobody told us what to do or what not to do. We just got fed up and we took matters into our own hands. And apparently that's what has to happen. I just don't know if it's a generational difference. If these people are brainwashed from the time they walk into the academy, which they probably are. But we had a different mentality back then, Vinny. We said enough was enough. If nobody took care of a situation, we took care of it ourselves. You and I both did, and that's a thing that's gone by the wayside, unfortunately.
Yeah, your point is well taken on that. That's not getting into rehashing old incidents, but yes,
Right.
yes, I completely understand that. But before we wrap up here, we got about 5 minutes left. Is what would you think if you had a sit down meeting with the governor or the commissioner or the legislator are all in the same room? I mean, what would the ask be? What would you tell them? I mean, it's like DeLon says, it's easy to blame HALT, even though I would disagree that the statistics don't prove that it's a problem. But what would you tell each and every one, or all together? What would you say to them?
I'd say I would rehash what I said earlier, Vinny. They're going to say it's not HALT. You look at the number of incidents, you look at the number of staff, you look at the number of inmates, you look at the number of prisons. Everything is going the wrong way. All the numbers are going the wrong way. It's a situation that they created. Lay the statistics out in front of them. Here it is. You tell me, with the things that you enacted, you put this into law. What did you change for the better? What's any better with this law besides feeling good and saying that you're making a difference? You're not. And you can prove it. You can prove it with the assaults on staff, the dangerous contraband, and the assaults on inmates. Quite simply, that's what I'd say to these people. Here are the statistics. It's your own statistics. Let's look back, and they have the statistics, Vinny. Let's look back pre-HALT. Let's look back now, and the percentage, like I said, the percentage of incidents based on the staff and inmates and number of prisons is gonna bear that what they've done doesn't work.
And
Or
we did
isn't
that
working.
before. If you remember, with I'll leave out the specific attorney's name, but we did that when we were friends of the court with the DAI settlement. If you remember,
Yeah.
remember that and some of the problems that was. But when I talked to some of the legislators and they ask me questions and they want to get into specifics, they forget that everything keeps going back to this, and I'm working with it with another correction union, the Mandela rules, and that considers isolation. But what people forget, and especially in New York, they because they don't understand the system, is that even when we go back to the DAI settlement, there was no true isolation in New York State. Nobody's putting them in a hole and forgotten about, and all they get is their meals 3 times a day. That is not the system, and it never has been in New York State.
No, it
And
hasn't.
it's never been that they were locked away, isolated, and forgotten about. And that violation that they keep telling with the Mandela rules is bogus and a cop out, if you ask me. That's never been, the people say solitary confinement in New York State, but New York, that's never existed.
It's never existed in New York State, and the reality of it is that an inmate that's in a special housing unit that's not solitary, but an inmate that is in a special housing unit sees more people per day from every department within the facility than an inmate does in general population. There's nurses that are around 2 or 3 times a day, doctors, clergy, staff are on rounds every half hour. They get law library every day. They see more people than an inmate in general population does. And there was a point in time, Vinny, we had a tour at at Attica Correctional Facility, and it was a group of politicians, and one young lady went into it was A block. She went into the flats of A block, and she thought that that was isolation. She thought that was solitary confinement. It was a general housing block. And then when they went to the special housing unit, they couldn't believe what they saw. It still didn't fit their narrative. It didn't mean anything. It didn't change anything. But the reality of it is, um, speaking from experience, I spent 17 years of my career in a special housing unit. Those inmates are weighted on hand and foot. They see more people than anybody in general population does.
I think you just said a mouthful right there, and I might have to steal that on you. I think that, what you just said, it doesn't fit their narrative.
Right. It doesn't. And that's all this is about. It's all about feel good and what they can do to tout themselves and look at me. But what they've done, it doesn't bear fruit except for their narrative. That's the only thing it does.
Yeah, I guess no. That I'm going to steal that on you, by the way.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just can't wrap my head around that. And what do you tell? I mean, because you've had to, I know I have had to. You've talked to the families of those that have gotten injured, and you've talked to those that have had stressful situations and so-called bad days. The assembly people don't have to go and explain to the family member how their husband or wife is never going to work again, and how they sustained broken bones to the face and are probably not going to work again. And now they're like, how do I provide, in the meantime, and besides the stressors that it causes at home? I don't understand that.
Vinny, I mean, what do you say about it? You can't make these people see something or believe something they don't want to see or they don't want to believe. Short of them coming and seeing these people, which they're not going to, seeing the staff member that's going through this or seeing the family member that's gone through this, short of the politician showing up and dealing with it firsthand, nothing will change. They're isolated. They live in their own little utopia. They feed off of each other, saying that we're doing this. I feel good. You feel good. Reality doesn't matter to them. Human lives don't matter to them. And what I don't understand, it's a microcosm of society. Things are shifting a little bit, but the good guy's now the bad guy, and it just I don't know how you change their mentality on that.
Yeah, I hate to agree with you on that, but it really is that the bad guys are now the good guys, and the good guys are now the bad guys.
Yep.
One last thing before we wrap it up is, and I get this question a lot, and a lot of people obviously have said this for years, but I think it's truer now more so than ever. Do you think it's going to take a bad, serious incident or losing of an area or a facility for something to change?
Absolutely, and I don't think just a singular incident will cause it to change. I think that they'll say it's an anomaly. They'll look to blame something other than what they've done. It's going to take something, in my opinion, more catastrophic than we've seen in New York in the past, unfortunately. I
Wow.
believe that.
That's a big statement. Wow. I hope that you and I are both wrong. I agree that it's going to take a death or a severe incident or something of a big magnitude to change. But that's something I'd love to be wrong on, because I don't want to see anybody get hurt or worse.
No, I don't want to see anybody get hurt either, Vinny. But that's the road we're going down, and it's just going to be a matter of time, unfortunately.
Yeah. I keep hearing that. I keep hearing that a lot. And it's like, and that's, going back to what we were talking about before, you can't solve a retention problem when people know that day is eventually coming. They just don't know what.
Right. Exactly.
Wow. All right, Dave. Well, we're going to wrap things up here.
Okay.
I want to say how much I appreciated your input and your knowledge, and hopefully you'll join us again soon, because there's so much to get to. And you really put a nice caveat into some of these. I'm going to steal your lyrics on some of this.
Very good.
That you got off, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate you having on and listening to you and giving the background. I truly appreciate that.
And no problem, Vinny, anytime. And I hope this helps somebody out there. I feel sorry for the people that are still working. And I hope this helps somebody. And if I can come back and be of assistance sometime in the future, let me know.
Yeah, we'll probably do that more so sooner than later. And as
Okay,
we
Vinny.
thank you. And as we wrap things up, I just want to remind everybody as we close out every show to remember to be kind, because you never know what the person next to you is going through. And again, thanks for our special guest, Mr. Dave Tessmer. And until next time, we will see everybody again next week.
You've been listening to the Working in Hell podcast with Vinny Blasio. Find this podcast on any of your favorite platforms like Audible, iHeart, and Spotify. And be sure to check out www.workinginhell.com for more information and important links. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.